Welcome to Draw Process. I'm Ike of Ike Comics. This is a weekly series where I draw a comic book page and share my thoughts and process. Sorry that you won't see my face in this intro. I forgot to record it at the time. It's been 2 weeks since then, and I've done another one, so it seems too late to get into that. We're starting off with the thumbnails. And the script, which is really loose, notes to myself for this page 50. So it's an even page. It's on the left-hand side. That is the side of the page that I'm drawing the thumbnail on so that I can see it in its format. So Croc tries to reach the sword in his side and he can't get it out. He looks to the dragoness. She's unconscious. He sees that. We see that as well, the audience. He's frustrated. He's growling. Sword is on one knee with his sword in front of him. And Sun bursts in front of Sword with his fists up, as if he's trying to defend Sword. Sword calls out, "Boy, no, get behind me." Croc gives up on removing the sword. He looks at them hissing with rage, because there's this sword that's impaled through his side, and he just has to give up. He can't reach it. So when I wrote these notes, this script, it was before I added some lines to the prior page. In the prior page, Sword, I added a line where Sword coughs and says, "Run, boy, run." He tells the boy to just get out of there. I liked adding it, and I thought it was going to help for this next page, but it means I have to change the script. And you'll see on my phone there, I literally have the script pulled up on the table. That's usually what's on my phone when my phone is up. Sometimes I reference an old page of the comic on my phone. So I'm trying to think through what I need to show. I know that the script is not good enough. Now that we've added that line especially. So I've got the first panel there, the hulking King Croc coughing, we get a clear look that he's able to stand, he's in pain, he can't reach the sword. Then just a shot of him looking over at the dragoness, we get a clear shot of her unconscious on the ground. That's what the second panel is. That goes along one row because it's like that moment in itself. Him feeling the pain in his side, not being able to reach it, him looking to her for help, can't get her help. That's one complete chunk of information, and I've put it on a row so that you get to a finish point as the eye goes across from left to right. Then we move down to the tall panel. This tall panel accentuates how tall King Croc is. I realized as I drew that, like, I can use word balloons, have King Croc speaking, and those word balloons trailing down that panel, bringing the eye down so that you follow down through the whole panel to Sword at the bottom. Otherwise, the reader can read a long panel and kind of skip just reading the top portion of it and then moving to the right to the next panel rather than down first. So I realized that was going to be useful. So now King Croc turning his attention to Sword on panel 3, speaking to him, something frustrated. Sword, we see the exhaustion, the pain on his face, and the resolve. He's having a still moment, ready to face, the villain here. I'm working out the next panel. Figuring out some shadows. Double checking my perspective on the floor there, because it's a tile grid floor, so I'm drawing that grid, seeing if I like that shape. The placement of these shadows on the wall has to do with what's going to look good graphically rather than what is realistic. Okay, so sun darts in front of sword. So now the camera's in front of sword. We had his close-up. And I'm trying to figure out how to position them. But sun is going to look like he darted over. So his cape can be flying in from the left there. As he darts forward and he's looking up at King Croc. And we need to see that sword is right behind him. And sun is probably going to say, yell something like, "Go away, leave us alone," something like that. Sun is still trying to protect sword. He sees sword's injured. He saw sword was getting crushed. He's trying to help. Now, what I decided to do in this moment was move on to the next page because I knew I was altering the script. And that alters the next page too in the script. So I'm trying to figure out how this will flow. I'm not even, I'm not totally sure about my plan, my thumbnails for this first page. So I'm going to do the other page too and see if the whole thing works. So the camera pulls back. It's up over the shoulder of King Croc. We get an establishing shot, but it's tight. The reason I'm going for a narrow panel is because I want to be able to fit a few more panels next to that for like a sequence. But I need the establishing shot. I want to capture the full figures of sun and sword in the physical space. King Croc, I don't have his feet showing because he's so large. He's just this large block of shadow, this large graphic element covering the panel. Okay, my gut instinct here, my first thought is to arrange this in a long horizontal panel and do two of those. But I remembered discussing this with Phil Hester. It's not, he doesn't like that. He doesn't recommend going, breaking up like a row that could be one unit of information and flow left to right. You're breaking it up, going, up and then back down. So I paused here knowing, I'm trying to apply his feedback, and I'm considering this. Maybe this doesn't flow as well. Maybe he's right about that. This long pause is me reading the script, me thinking. I went ahead and left that in, so you can see. Sometimes in these videos, I edit out the pauses so you don't realize that I pause and think. It just looks like magic. That I'm always moving. So one thing I like to consider is in a double page spread, I do not like my gutters to align. I don't like a gutter on a left-hand page to align with a gutter on the right-hand page. I don't know why. I mean, I guess that relates to like visual graphic grouping, that the eye might want to go all the way across the page, seeing one solid row of panels that align across both pages. The eye might think this is a double page spread. I'll go all the way across. That might be part of it. I find that I just generally don't like grids, which is like, that's horrible to say because there's so much in American comics that goes back to basic grids and 9-panel grids, especially. And there's so many people that swear by using the grid. But in my comics, I try to never just use a grid, because, and it's hard to, I tried to think about this because I recently spoke with another professional. I was at Memphis Comic Expo, and I got I requested a critique, some feedback from a veteran. He was hard on me. That was interesting, and it was very good for me. I very much appreciate it. But he swears by grids in a way, like aligning your gutters. I think that's fair to say. I might be overstating it. That I think there's another principle behind that, and I don't want to get into it right now. But he thinks these gutters should align on a page. Panels should be the same size. That if one panel is smaller than another, like a little more narrow than another, it would represent it taking less time. Like a shorter amount of time passing because it's more narrow. That's a theory that I'm not sure I agree with. So that's got me thinking a lot. But I realized I just don't like the way grids look on a page. When I see a page that's a block of panels and all the panels are the same size, I feel like this slight feeling of exhaustion that I do not want to start reading because I'm going to have to go through every one of these panels. And it makes such a strong graphic statement, it pulls me out of the story. That when I see a grid, a 9-panel grid, let's say, I am seeing that's the overwhelming info I'm receiving from the page, is the grid itself, the panel borders, the gutters. And it pulls me out of the story, because instead of looking at the graphics of the art and the story in the art that's being communicated, or the flow of that, I'm just looking at the grid, which I think, to me, I want that to feel natural. I want it to be like invisible to the reader, invisible to me when I'm reading. And it's absolutely not visible when there's a clear grid and clear structure followed. And this is a controversial opinion that I have not fully thought out. All I'm saying is something in me, I recognize, I find it distasteful. It doesn't suit my sensibilities for some reason. And I'm trying to make sense of that. And that goes against what I was getting as feedback. So, again, this thumbnail I just worked out, that is the next page. That's not today's page. But I wanted to figure out what's going to happen all the way to the end. And you'll notice in the thumbnail, I did not yet correct those 2 panels that were the long horizontal ones, panel 2 and 3. I didn't turn those into the more vertical shape. Now, by making them on one row, all narrow, vertical panels, you get a nice ABC, a nice 3-beat chord, they go together. But by breaking it up horizontally like that, it turns it into panel 1 is 1 beat. And then panel 2 and 3 are a separate vertical beat, right? And that's something I'm taking away from, I am appreciating and see how I can apply from what I learned from the veteran this weekend. Some of it I'm not sure how to apply, like grids, but because I'm not sure how I feel about them, but I am recognizing that there is rhythm and beats and the sentences, and almost like in music you have these pieces of the music, not just chorus and bridge, but sentences and antecedents. I think these are terms people use in music theory, but these pieces, I think the best way I can think of it is like rhythm, like beats that go together. And I should take full advantage of creating those beats visually in a grouping on the page and in the whole page as a whole. So definitely, like if I have an action or like an idea starting, so ABC, if A being like something's about to happen, B is the action, C is the consequence. Like if I'm going to show that occurring on a page as a piece of the page, then I should try to put it on one row all together so that it goes ABC. It's read together in a line, right in line with each other. They get grouped visually to make a stronger statement of that relationship between those images. So so there's things I'm applying there. So if you remember the thumbnail, this is like literally the thumbnail. I'm working it out here. I'm trying to keep it very loose, very shape-based. This is about the visual graphic shapes. I think a lot of artists can relate. There's this push and pull between illustrating, like just drawing the figure and bringing them to life on the page, and the other side of it, which is treating it like a graphic element. I think it's very important to treat it like a graphic element so that the page flows and reads really clearly and well. But there's rendering involved, there's illustration involved, and so you can get in the details, but I find that if I over-illustrate, it might feel nice and free, and I kind of can flow and let it on the page, which is definitely something I value. But in the end, it's less. It takes more time. It's less efficient, and it's not as efficient in the storytelling. So if I can focus more on the graphic elements first, and I can do that by keeping the pencils very loose and very just shape graphic language. You'll see now I'm rendering. Now I'm adding the details on King Croc. Now that I've positioned him where I wanted him. And now's the time to illustrate and render. The shadows for me are just rough gray pencil I'm putting down that I can refine in the ink phase. I'll make the final choices in the ink phase. But I want to scribble those in a bit to help me see the three-dimensionality of this and get closer to what I need to do with the inks. So I don't have to leap so far, in the inks. I don't want my inks to exactly trace my pencils, but I don't want to have to go so far beyond my pencils that I'm making mistakes, that I'm just not planned ahead. Something I've been doing here is letting his sword just create these graphic shapes, these lines that cut into the panels at angles. If his sword was perfectly vertical, it would start to look like a panel gutter, especially if I left it like white or close to white. It kind of creates this gutter that breaks up like a panel, like on a close-up here on his face, where his sword is those diagonal lines on the right. But I can also position those lines of that sword to create an interesting shape, to increase the graphic value of this panel. I chose to put a black shadow, like you'll see behind his head, kind of along his eye line, there's a black shadow. I chose to put that there. It has nothing to do with the actual environment they're in. But it creates a sort of a graphic, at least some kind of graphic element that will help guide the eye to the panel on the left. So when you're above, I feel that that you're going to be drawn to the far left. There's a lot of black at the top left of this left panel here. If I put a lot of black at the top left or the top of the other panel on the right, they would compete graphically, and the weight might go in the wrong place. So the line is kind of diagonal. It's kind of pointing right toward the panel that you need to go read, and it has that black that swoops down, guiding the eye down where it needs to go there too. And yes, there's sun swooping in front of sword, letting his cape flow at a real sharp angle. Again, that's another graphic. Same with sword's sword. His sword is at an angle. He's not holding it straight up because that would be a boring visual. Same thing, I mean, that's also why the walls are, the building is sloped a bit on the walls to help me get a few more angles into the art later. That was part of the design intention. The bottom panel, a very strong, I guess, what would you call that? It's like a close-up. It's like an extreme close-up on Sun's face, but it's an over-the-shoulder at a sword. So this two-person shot, like that's a pretty extreme one that I did there. But I'm also trying to push the boundaries that you may have seen the old 16 panels? I forget. 22. Wallywood's 22 panels that always work. Those basic shots that you see, everyone uses them, and they just get really redundant and boring if they're just handled strictly. Things like, let's see, it's big head, extreme close-up, back of head, part of head, profile, no background, right? A down shot with cast shadows, side shot or top, reflection. These are the different shots. They're not all directly from film terminology, like camera terminology, but these basic shots you would get for shot, reverse shot, two-person shot, like profile, these full body shot, like these can get really redundant to me. And so I try not to just follow like a rule of like, I don't look at other people's comics and go, what panels, what types of panels are they using? How are they capturing two people talking? I actually try to envision my characters in a real physical space and move my eye around, move my camera around, and set it up to be interesting from imagination, from visualizing it, not from rules of not looking at a list and saying this is an option. Now I find use in those rules. Those things can be helpful for me. I like to double check. I like to look at the rules other people follow and like their ideas and how they do things. I do like to look to double check my own perspective, because a lot of times we have blind spots and we don't realize what we've been skipping. But it also just helps if you're trying to draw from a visual, from imagination of your figures in visual space, and rather than from rules or tricks that you're using to get the job done. Because if you're operating from rules and from tricks and stuff, then you're much more likely to to not realize your blind spots and to keep repeating the same sorts of panels and stuff. So you kind of can ask yourself, am I trying to find the easy way out? Am I doing the same thing every time? And compare your work to others. So that I find useful in studying the rules and structures that other people follow, not only for panels but everything in comics. Okay, so we are already inking in the pencils here. I think I use an H. I may start with a 2H and then switch to an H. Sometimes I just start right with the H. Trying to make decisions on where to put the blacks. I decided to put a shadow in front of King Croc that just covers the bottom of this panel to create a lot of weight at the bottom. So because I put this large black shadow in the top left of the panel, and I didn't want more weight at the top than the bottom. I wanted to kind of weigh the panel down visually, so I added more black to the bottom of the panel, all around sword there. Now, sword is squatting down on one knee, sitting on his leg even, so like very low to the ground. So you'll notice in my perspective, he looks very short. Now, technically, I think he should be a little bit taller than I drew him as. Maybe a little bigger too. But graphically, I want him to look that low on the panel and that small. So there's a little interplay between like believability, like it's somewhat based on the real perspective of how big he should be, but it's also somewhat just a play, just a graphic representation. So that's where I wanted him positioned. Maybe he should have been a little taller, a little larger. It's kind of hard to say just looking at it on the camera here. But the image works, I think. Same thing with Sword and Sun here. So how do I know that Sun is the right height? So I wanted to leave a little room for word balloons at the top. He couldn't be taller than that. I wanted Sword to be well seen, so I knew I would need a pretty high horizon line so that you could see Sword behind him. You'll notice that the wall on the line on the back of the wall is pretty close to horizontal. So that line in the stones of the wall is basically showing us where that horizon is. So the idea here is Sun lunging. He's hunched down some. His eye line is in line, basically with his Sword's shoulders. So Sword squatting and Sun standing and maybe squatted quite a bit as he's lunging with his legs spread out and bent. That's about the height comparison. So technically, I think I should have raised the horizon a little more. For the Sun would have been a little taller, but again, if it reads visually, if it makes sense, then it's probably good enough. I was reading some comics over the past few days, and I noticed a lot of what I was just saying about using graphic rules and techniques to imply perspective, to imply depth, and so on. That kind of like what I was just saying I did with Sun and Sword, that those heights, their height comparison wasn't quite right. It's just, it works visually. It's good enough. It implies it. And these comics were doing that, but more rigidly, more following some parameters and some rules to simplify it, such as having all the figures standing on the ground, and that ground being the bottom of the panel, the horizon being the bottom of the panel, and their feet touching that, basically. So that way, you draw taller figures and then shorter figures in the background, and boom, you have perspective. And it's one point, so you got like the surfaces can all be kind of like flat on one side, the side facing the camera. So lots of tricks like that, if that makes sense. Uh, so I think it can be overdone because for me, even like with the Wallywoods 22 panels that always work, like these ways of positioning figures remove them from a being placed in space, and like these tricks to like help it look like they're in a physical space without actually putting them there, like with perspective and more clearly. It does save time, and it can be graphically attractive, but it can also make it feel ungrounded, make it feel not real, make it not feel like alive, like a not. It can be jarring. It can be disorienting to read a comic. I mean, another example is when it's medium shot. Like you're only seeing the chest up, or maybe the hips up, and it's shot after shot like that, or close up after close up after close up. You never get a sense of the space that they're in, which for me is disorienting. Other people have different opinions for sure, so that is fascinating to me, that my experience of reading is very different than others. Like that others, professionals, great people that I admire, are seeing it differently and experiencing it differently, that perhaps they appreciate more the graphic and the beauty that can be shown through conventions and not like things really being in perspective or something. Whereas I'm the opposite. I would rather see things as they're happening in space, and it look less graphically appealing. Okay, and I'm just doing the finishing touches now on this page. White out, white paint, and a brush pen. And I'm cleaning up panel borders, a few little spots here and there. And there it is, the finished page. 2 panels, same size. Boom, boom. I wanted to I had to work out what Croc is going to say, because this wasn't in the script. I didn't want him to say too much, so kind of working out his personality, and he's basically an alien. His emotions and feelings would be so different, his perspective so different than a mammal, than a human. So here he says, "Croc eat boy, Croc emperor." Now earlier he said, "Croc eat boy, Croc will be emperor." So in a way, this was me trying to show there's some desperation. He's overreaching at this point with his strange way of speaking. Earlier, he was more accurate. "I will be emperor." And now he's just calling himself emperor. So he's losing his edge. And then a nice line from Sword, we see even more of his disdain for these lizards. "Empty words, lizards can never rule men." So a deep insult. And a further view of Sword's nobility, we could say. "Go away, you big ugly snake." This was a hard line too. How humorous to make Sun. When I looked at his expression, I had wished I showed more fear and terror in his face, but I didn't. And so it made it hard to choose the line of what he would say that would suit his expression and not make it too funny at this serious moment. This was also very carefully chosen dialogue. "No, son, get out of my way." There is an anger in Sword's voice, a belittling even, you could say. "Get out of my way." And there's like a seriousness, like, "Listen to me." That was intentional. I didn't, he could have said, you've done enough, son. Good job. Like, or like, no, run away. Like, get out the door. Like, he could have done anything, but no, he's like completely focused on his goal and looks almost murderously at Son here. So this was also intentional, that he's not like this perfect father figure that's going to be like, good job, son. Like, he's not that. Maybe someday he can become that in the story, but I wanted you to see that that's not him yet. So that was all very specifically chosen dialogue. So that's it for page 50. I'll see you next week. Be the practice of your art. Find others doing the same.